times during COVID, when we're all sitting at home, it's sort of like a ray of light that we get to watch these amazing sessions when we can't all be together. It certainly brightens up my evenings.
आज पेंडेमिक में हम डिजिटली लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल कर रहे हैं और मुझे लगता है कि हमारे सामने श्रोता नहीं है, हम आपस में बात कर रहे हैं, लेकिन उस फील को, उस उमंग को महसूस कर सकते हैं कि हजारों लाखों लोग हमसे जुड़े हुए हैं, हमको सुन रहे हैं और कहीं ना कहीं कोई एक सार्थक हस्तक्षेप हो रहा है.
People who came online to view and listen to our incredible speakers from across the world, we were able to continue in our tradition of ensuring the free flow of knowledge and information. On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, and all my colleagues at Teamwork Arts, welcome back to JLF's First Edition. We're delighted to host the virtual launch of Anjali Joseph's latest work, Keeping in Touch, published by Context. Keeping in Touch weaves a complex tale of love in the face of cultural friction, dreams, aspirations, and disappointments, exploring the nuances of a long-distance relationship set between Assam in India and London in the UK. Anjali Joseph's first novel, Saraswati Park, won the Desmond Elliott Prize, the Betty Trask Award, and the jointly won the Vodafone Crossword Book Award for Fiction in India. Another country was longlisted for the Man Asian Literary Prize. The Living was shortlisted for the DS Prize. We're absolutely delighted to have Anjali Joseph with us, introducing her new work. Anjali, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. I'd like to thank JLF for hosting this, and also to thank Jeet for kindly agreeing to talk to me about the book. So Keeping in Touch, I think I started working on it in about 2015 when the previous novel, The Living, was kind of wrapping up. And I describe it as a dysfunctional love story with two sort of commitment-averse protagonists. There's Ved, who is actually British but was born in India, and then Ketaki, who is from Assam but has also spent quite a lot of time outside Assam, growing up elsewhere in India, and who travels around quite a bit doing various projects. She works in art curation and other sort of art-related things, and they meet in the airport in London, and much of the novel is about their story, but it's also about this unusual and possibly magical product that Ved ends up being involved with, which is a light bulb called the everlasting lucifer, which is so long lasting that it is believed to last roughly as long as a human life, maybe 75 or 80 years.
Wow. Thank you so much, Anjali. And JLF's First Edition is delighted to launch Keeping in Touch. Anjali is in conversation with poet and novelist Jeet Thayil. Anjali will discuss the search for stillness in the midst of chaos and the delicate balance of attachment, intimacy, and modernity. Jeet Thayil, poet, musician, and novelist, is the editor of the Penguin Book of Modern Indian Poets, forthcoming in 2021. His 4 novels include the bestseller, Narcopolis, and the most recently, Names of the Women, a retelling of the New Testament from the points of view of the women whose roles were suppressed, reduced, or erased from the Gospels. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, to feel free to ask questions by typing it onto the comment section below, and we will send these to Jeet to ask of Anjali at the end of the session. Ladies and gentlemen, keeping in touch, Anjali Joseph in conversation with Jeet Thayil. Jeet, Anjali, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Real pleasure to be here to help launch this wonderful novel. I'm going to start our conversation, Anjali, by putting the conversation into some kind of historical or spiritual context. The last time we met was in March 2020, just before the world went into lockdown. And I wonder if you could tell us what you've been doing since then and where you've been.
Yeah, I forgot. That's right. We met in March, right before lockdown. And what have I been doing? I don't know. I feel like time has gone very fluid and sort of about 10 minutes has passed or 20 years. I'm not sure. Possibly both at the same time. But I was finishing this book and also doing a lot of reading, doing some teaching. I've been in England. I obviously haven't traveled anywhere. So I haven't been back to India. I haven't been home since January last year. But I suppose in my head, I've been all over the place, really. I mean, I've been in 19th century Ireland and Polynesia and other places. Yeah, and some of the time also, just being inside my house, not going outside. So it's kind of a...
Are those the locations on what you're working on right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on a book about, or at least I'm thinking about a book about a 19th century Anglo-Irish minor aristocrat who was also a naval officer and who in his later years became interested in standing stones, like Stonehenge type of monuments, of which there are a lot in Ireland.
Is it easier to work in a situation like this, or is it more difficult?
I guess practical things like, obviously I can't go to Ireland, you can't do research and stuff. They're obviously, different. But I haven't really found it super difficult to work or any different than usual in some ways. I found it quite okay, really. How about you?
No, I think that's a strange thing about the work that we do. It makes you adjust, I think, much too well and much too quickly.
Yeah. Honestly, we've been in training for this for quite some time, I would think.
Our lives.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Yeah.
Terrible, really.
Yeah.
Are you vaxxed?
I've had the first dose, yeah.
Which one?
It was the AstraZeneca one.
Ah, that's the same one that we have here. And I think they've begun to recognize it as, they've stopped being racist about it and they've begun to recognize it as a real vaccine.
Right. The one made in Pune. Oh,
In Pune.
Yeah.
The last time we met was London, but we met a long time before that in Guwahati when you were living there. And I was passing through, as I remember. And I remember we went for a walk by the Brahmaputra at one point.
Right.
And which, of course, appears in Keeping in Touch. And I wonder, that was a long time ago. Did you know then that you would be working on a novel set partly in Assam?
Oh, that's a good question. I remember you'd been to Shillong for a Sahitya Academy event, but I don't remember what year that was. I was only in Guwahati for 3 years, so it must have been between 2014 and 2017. I think so. I think I sort of, I was really sort of fascinated by and enchanted by Assam from the first time I visited, and then certainly from when I moved there. But I also was aware that, it's such a kind of intricate and sophisticated culture with so much history and literature and, just such an incredible place that I knew it wouldn't be, I knew I had a lot to learn, even if I wanted to try and write something with some connection to Assam.
And why? What made you think of Assam as a possible subject for a literary novel?
Well, honestly, having lived in Assam, I think, it's such a literary culture. Yeah. One of the things I loved about living there is that everybody is a reader and you have a conversation with a rickshaw driver or the person there was a older gentleman in the gas concession just down the road from my flat where I used to have to go and ask for a new cylinder or whatever. And he would talk to me about books and tell me what he thought it meant to be a writer and all of these other things. So I think of it as an extremely literary place. But why? What was Anjali Joseph doing writing a book about Assam? I think that's a sort of more that's a better question to think about. And I did feel tentative about it, but I think I also felt so sort of smitten and fascinated with so many things in Assam, and I spent some time learning Assamese, although my Assamese is still quite poor. But I learned to read and write, and I'd kind of read short stories with the help of 2 different teachers over time, and I traveled about quite a bit on my own and stuff. Yeah, I think it was just I had a feeling it was going to be the kind of fascination or the kind of love for a place that was going to generate something. But obviously I had my misgivings about that too.
I know the way that experience, for example, learning the language in Guwahati has filtered into the novel when Ved is taking lessons and the kind of that occurs to him. And I was very interested to see the way that the history and culture of Assam is woven into this story in ways both subtle and overt. And at moments, it comes across as a living thing. It's so deep in the fabric of that novel that it's alive. And I think that's one of the achievements of this novel. And I also wanted to ask, what was it that first made you travel to Guwahati and made you decide to rent an apartment and live there? I mean, that's a hell of a commitment, considering both the characters in this novel are so averse to commitment.
Yeah. Well, I'd been living a sort of somewhat itinerant life for a period of time, I guess. I mean, I'd been in Bombay working as a journalist. Then I studied in Norwich for a year. Then I was back in Bombay for a year. And then again, I was studying. I finished a PhD. And I'd sort of been in Norwich for a while, and it's a nice place, but it's not a huge town. And I think there I'd sort of grown to appreciate the charms of living in a smaller place after living in Bombay, which is, the opposite of a small place. And I'd sort of grown to enjoy things like actually running into the same people on the street and having a conversation and not acting like you're super busy and in a hurry so that you can feel important or whatever. And also that Norwich is it's in the east of England and kind of is on the margins, albeit of a not very large country, but it's badly connected to the rest of the country. And so it has this slightly tucked away secret feel. And but initially I went to visit Assam and Shillong with my friend Veda, and we had sort of big plans. We thought we would travel all over the Northeast. And we didn't, we just scraped the surface. Like we spent some time in Guwahati and some time in Shillong. And that was around the period of time where I was kind of thinking about leaving Norwich. And I'd just done a 2-month residency in Shanghai in China. And I was sort of half thinking about, should I move to China for a few years and like learn Chinese and stuff? But I was deterred by various things like the pollution and also the fact that, learning Chinese was going to be quite an undertaking, and probably I wouldn't be able to have a conversation with anybody in Chinese for about 5 years, of any substance. It also sounds very corny, but I wonder if I have some past life connection with Assam or had, because when I was there, I was really sort of charmed by the place. And it's also the only place in India where anyone ever said to me, assumed that I was local, because I'm kind of a mix from various places. Like nobody ever, generally people don't think that I'm from wherever I happen to be.
Yeah.
Except for somewhere like Bombay, where everybody's just from Bombay. Yeah,
everybody's from somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the actual story. It struck me as a love story for adults, and I was very taken by the kind of hesitations and the wariness and the texting, the travel towards the lover and away from the lover, and the kind of 1 step forward, 2 steps back quality of modern romance. And all of it seems to unfold in real time. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so. That's sort of what I wanted to do. And I know it could seem frustrating at times to a reader that, why don't they just sort of sort it out, and whatever they like each other, why don't they just get together? But that is sort of the experience of being, you said adult, but being a little bit older, not being 20 and falling in love, but being, 38 and falling in love. There's so many kind of mechanisms that one has put into place for how to live and how to be safe and how to at least have the illusion of controlling your life or making it manageable. And it's not necessarily that easy to drop those habits of interaction and those little sort of dances of self-defense and whatever, when it might be time to drop it. I mean, even if you're ready to drop them in some ways, it's not necessarily the process of a single moment. And so really, and also both of these characters are carrying kind of what I think of as almost pain encoded into images in them. And part of the sort of journey of the book is for them to see that pain really isn't current anymore and sort of revisit it and kind of let go of those images or explode them in some way,
And they both seem almost overwhelmed by that kind of pain.
Yeah.
To the extent that they seem so suspicious and wary.
Yeah.
Which I think really is the thing that makes the reader keep reading. Also, I thought that the way you treat sex in this novel, again, is a mark of an adult love story. There's nothing coy about it. It isn't airbrushed. Sometimes it's unsatisfactory. Sometimes it's unremarkable. Frequently, it's comic. And for a reader, I think that's one of the pleasures of this novel, because it seems real. It's not contrived at all. And I wanted to ask, did it seem like a risky thing to do, to write that way about sex in the context of Indian society today?
I think, well, writing about sex is always a little unnerving because, you worry that you're not going to do it well. And also, I didn't actually give it that much thought in terms of sort of people reacting badly. I think probably if I had given it much thought, it would have been quite inhibiting. But it just seemed so important to the book. I mean, it's such an important part of getting to know somebody, right? It's such an important part of intimacy, but it's also such an important arena in which it's very difficult to escape the truth about how comfortable you are with yourself. When you're intimate with somebody else, that's the time when there's not much it's difficult to hide how you feel about yourself. And I think the whole book for me is sort of it initially came from a kind of abstract impulse. I had the sense of wanting to write about something including some idea of telepathy, but also a kind of spiritual keeping in touch with oneself, which I felt just instinctively was not necessarily, at least I couldn't imagine the kind of, spiritual flowering or enlightenment where you're enlightened and then you're just floating around on your cloud all the time. It's like, but still, you might have to go to the electricity office and say what's going on with this bill, and all sorts of other things might happen. And so I felt that kind of process would always be, or I envisaged it being a kind of dropping the ball and picking up the ball, dropping the ball and picking up the ball. And this kind of alternating process of keeping in touch with yourself is also mirrored, I guess, by the process of the two characters, sort of how much intimacy they can bear with each other from the beginning is also to do with how much intimacy they each can bear with himself or herself. So sex is just so important because there are these different kind of dynamics in it, and it also has this character of sometimes being the inverse of how people appear to relate in a sort of, clothed, socially coded world. I don't mean that everyone just turns into an animal or something. I just mean that our discomforts and our patterns and other things appear in different ways in intimacy. Yeah, so I guess it just didn't seem to me that it was going to be possible not to write about sex.
Right. But it's so often not written about in love stories,
Right, yeah.
Let's talk about Everlasting Lucifer. I think it's just a fantastic a bulb. It should be the name of a band. And just to tell readers, to those who are listening to us or watching us right now, and it's difficult to believe that there's anyone out there, isn't it?
How do you mean? Oh, yeah, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
In a way, it's a good thing, but it's also kind of strange. It's like we're talking to each other and there are these boxes, and who knows if there's anybody out there. Let's assume
who knows? Yeah.
there are a few people. So just for those people who haven't read the novel, Everlasting Lucifer is the name of this bulb that one of the characters, who is so interesting, his name occurs twice, Ved, he's an investment banker, and he plans to invest in a bulb called Everlasting Lucifer. And I love a description kind of just thrown in at one point about the bulb. You say that the more you gaze at it, the brighter it becomes, which of course is magical, and it sounds to me like the devil.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, I think I was thinking of something much nicer, actually. Elsewhere in the novel, I think I have a line something like, light gets brighter when it's actually seen.
Yeah. And again, that there's a kind of a subtext throughout this novel of spiritual or meditative moments where, as you were talking about earlier, where Ketaki, especially when she starts to do yoga and starts to meditate, some of the things she says about that experience and then you realize that that's a kind of a river that flows throughout the book. But I wanted to ask about Everlasting Lucifer. Was it a light bulb moment when you decided to make it a narrative element of the novel?
No, it actually happened slightly accidentally, or seemed to. I started writing a short story called Everlasting Lucifer when I was about 8. My dad had given me a book of short stories by Scott Fitzgerald, and I remember reading them. And a lot of them had this sort of combination of a slightly speculative element, but also the kind of poetry of America's industrialized society, maybe taken to this slightly magical height, like the diamond as big as the Ritz, for example.
Yeah.
So I think it was kind of in response to that mood from the stories that I started writing this story called Everlasting Lucifer. And I only wrote about a page and a bit. I didn't really know where to go with it. I think it was just the name that appealed to me, and the idea. And then sort of 30 years later, I was sitting and writing. I'd got an email from my then agent who said that, why don't you enter a story into this short story called sort of competition or whatever for a magazine that was paying quite well. And I just finished The Living. And so I started writing this story, which was became the first chapter of the book, basically. It's pretty much unchanged. And I knew already that I wanted to write about Ketaki, and I had a kind of idea of her. And then Ved just became the other person, and Everlasting Lucifer also came into it. So it just sort of came back up again. Yeah.
In a way, the story tells us of ordinary lives and ordinary moments in ordinary lives, but those moments are woven together and contextualized and framed in such a way that they become extraordinary moments. But for me, one of the great pleasures of this novel was the pace of it. I'm addicted to thrillers, and for me, this it has the pace of a thriller. It's a page turner, and I read it in, I think, 2 sittings. And
I'm so glad.
I really wanted to know, was it written fast?
It kind of was, and I actually had the idea that when I first started writing it, I had some kind of idea that maybe I'd write it like a Dickens novel in installments and somehow like put them online or something. And I'd been rereading some Dickens, and I'd noticed that the way that he would construct a plot was that he would just sort of pull all of these threads out, and then he'd pick up some of them and tie them up and just leave the rest where they were, or have some really nonsensical kind of tying up at the end, like, oh no, it was all just a test to see if you were whatever, or whatever, just some kind of indie film or soap opera type of resolution for some of the subplots. So that's sort of how I started. but then I wasn't going through a period of my life in which that alacrity really found a kind of outside answer, I guess. So, you know, it just took, my agent stopped being an agent. I had to find a new agent. Other stuff happened. Like, you know, there was just like a long time. And so I just ended up, I didn't really want to, but and I'm sure it has got better for it, but I ended up kind of doing the novelist with many stomachs thing that I'd done with all of my other books, which is sort of writing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. But substantially, in some ways, I don't think it's changed. I just cut and cut and cut and cut, which is really my main thing that I do when I rewrite, and it always feels good.
So you made it much shorter than it was.
Yeah, I think the first draft would have been longer, definitely, and it was probably a bit baggy. Yeah, and then it just got like shorter and shorter and shorter. I mean, if you gave me a weekend now with, in fact, I haven't really read the book, obviously, since it's come out. I've been shy of looking at it. I almost feel like if I look at it, I'll just want to like digest it into a postcard or something. So.
Yeah, no, I don't think you should do that.
Yeah.
And also, probably, you know, I never know if it's a good idea to read a book as soon as it comes out.
No.
Written. Yeah.
Yeah.
You just want to go back to work.
Yeah.
Ketaki works in the world of art, and she thinks about it so much and in such an interesting way. I remember the descriptions of the milk jug,
right,
the tapestry in that pub that she comes across.
Mm-hmm.
Descriptions that seem really true to life, but then they open up into something completely different. They open up into a kind of a timelessness and into the past. And I'm thinking of that, the 16th century mill keeper's cottage that is turned into a pub. And then the words that you spend a little attention on, rush cutters and wettle and
yeah,
conversations around those words. And
yeah,
and they always tell us something about art. And I know from your Instagram page that you're an artist. You've been doing lots of watercolors. You've been pretty prolific during this year and a half or thereabouts. Tell us about art and how it plays into this novel.
Well, I've always loved painting and drawing, and that's something that both my brother and I used to do, that my mom used to do and still does. And somehow, I think when I went to university, it's just something I stopped doing. I think I also really stopped writing fiction, which I'd always done around that time when I first went to university as an undergraduate. I think there was a sort of point in my life when it seemed like it was important to be good at things, or getting it right was important. And that obviously isn't actually a great condition for making any kind of art or, you know, playing around with things. And so I didn't really paint or draw again at all till lockdown. And then I suddenly had this urge to get some watercolors and stuff. And I did some online courses, but also I just started painting all the time. And it's been kind of really joyful. I think that I've always thought in a visual way, and I've always loved looking at paintings and thinking about art, but there's a tactile quality to painting, and a sort of accidental quality, because, you know, it's not that controlled, especially I'm not that skilled or anything. And there's also a sort of joy, I have to say, in doing something badly. I would really recommend it to people. I mean, painting in particular, but anything really, like making art in a sort of where the intention is serious, in the sense that you know that you love doing something and you're going to do it every day, for example, but where you also don't really have an investment in trying to make it marketable or even praiseworthy, where you just love doing it. And again, I remember my friend Louis talking about some of his family members in Tezpur, and how different people had different talents that would come out at Bihu. So, which is, I mean, there are 3 Bihus, but the big kind of festival of where people dance, and there's theater and music and other stuff, is in the spring, Rongali Bihu. And he was talking about a cousin who was a really good drummer, and you know that he had never really realized this until he happened to be in his home in Tezpur during Bihu and so kind of saw all of this. And I just really like that idea that art isn't necessarily something made by, you know, professional artists or whatever, that it's something all of us would want to do, and maybe even feel quite good about doing badly. Just the other day, Simon and I were talking about, I think reproduction, I can't remember, but we got onto the thought of how, you know, reproduce music, like being able to listen to a song on your phone now with your earphones or whatever, is such a recent thing, relatively speaking, and that for probably like 100 years or something before that, or much longer, like, you know, there would be a hit song, and the way that you would sort of engage with it is you'd learn to play it or sing it on some instrument or other. Like that's how you saw it. Maybe you would buy the sheet music, you know, in Europe or in Britain or whatever, but that's how people used to engage with music. So the idea that everything is sort of segmented and that artists make art and, you know, it's all kind of professionalized, I think is sort of sad.
It sucks the joy out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
And when we were children and we were making art, probably when we were freest, there was never that question of how do I now pitch this to an agent, or, you know.
No, but I have to say, my mother, who I believe is watching this, used to actually conduct little like art. My brother and I would put on little like art shows, and she would visit them, and she would like buy our works of art for like 5 paise or something, but only the ones she liked. And she'd be like, I like this one. I don't think this is interesting. So yeah, I've been steeped in market economics for a long time. Yeah.
A taste of the future.
Yeah.
Well, you might want to thank her, you know.
Yeah. That's why I write these commercial bestsellers, you know.
These pot boilers.
That early training, yeah.
Well, would you like to read us something?
Sure. So this is it's 2 paragraphs, and it's when Ketaki is visiting London. She's staying with a friend and she's working on an exhibition. Ketaki spent a quiet afternoon. It was so peaceful to organize something abstract, so terrifying to try to put one's own life in order. When she finished her work, she leafed through the picture books on one of the tables. There was a catalogue from the Hokusai exhibition. A whole page showed enormous carp leaping in a waterfall. The water was depicted in straight lines, opaque color, as though it had been a solid object. She sat looking at it for a while. What was being represented, she realized, was the light on the water, not the water itself. The carp were monstrous, their florid tails and grotesque heads protruding. It wasn't realism, but reality too was more grotesque than people like to believe. She wandered down the main road looking in shop windows without desire. When she dropped into a yoga studio to ask about classes, they offered a month's trial. The next morning, her mind clear, she worked through sun salutations, standing poses, forward bends, twists. A man next to her sweated in just a pair of shorts. The teacher appeared and leaned the whole of her body onto Ketaki's back until she was folded into Paschimottanasana, west on top pose, her face sweetly mashed into her knees. Expectant, silent, she breathed.
Sorry, that was my phone.
Someone's keeping in touch. Boom, boom.
Yeah, you know, normally it never rings, but somebody called. Probably the bank asking for money. Lovely passage, that a great way to end a chapter. It just makes you want to turn the page and find out what happens next. And I love the description of light, and somehow I have a feeling that I'm never going to look at Hokusai's fish in the same way again. You know? They are monstrous.
They're pretty surreal fish out there.
Yeah. Are you on Twitter?
Yeah, kind of, but in a very ambivalent way. I was on Twitter, and then I deleted my Twitter thinking that's enough of this. And then I sort of shimmied in the side door, but I don't know how long I'll be staying.
Is it a hindrance in a way?
No, it's not that. It's just I began to feel like I was sort of just inviting loads of people that I didn't know into my house to complain around me all the time. And I didn't have the self-restraint to not look at it when I was on my phone. You know, when you finish one thing and then you think, what's the next thing I have to do? And then you just look at your phone, not because the answer is on your phone. So it wasn't really bringing me any joy, I have to say.
Do you think this conversation that we're having right now is a way of inviting strangers into our house and asking them to comment on us too?
I think it's us forcing ourselves into their house.
Maybe.
Which is so much more fun.
Actually, really. I was thinking about Saraswati Park because that was the first thing that I read by you. And I remember the thing that struck me about it is, you know, I'm always a kind of a sucker for novels set in Bombay. I will read a novel set in Bombay, but I liked it particularly because it was this portrait of the kind of middle-class Bombay fella that you run into 100 times a day in a city like Bombay, and you always wonder about what their lives are like. And it told us, it really entered this man's life and his head, and I thought it was just a great thing to read from a young woman author. And also, it struck me because of the sense of place in it. And I wonder, can you only do that one time with one city?
Oh, like a city book, you mean?
Well, in a way, Saraswati Park is a city book.
Yeah. You mean only one? Can you only have that kind of response to one city in particular?
And one time, can you do it again?
I don't know if I would want to in the same way. I mean, it's interesting because I still enjoy being in Bombay, but I don't really even feel like I am from Bombay anymore, which I always used to. And I think it's partly because it's been sort of more than 10 years since I lived in Bombay. And also because the city is changing. I mean, Manto calls Bombay ever-changing Bombay. And in the last, 10 or 20 years, it's really been changing, right? Like, so even the geography of the city, the metro and all these other things and flyovers and stuff that I don't know, I feel like it's now like some kind of city in a dream to me. It's not a city that I know so well. I mean, certain bits of it I still know, but other parts I really couldn't necessarily tell you exactly where I am or what's going on or whatever. So,
sure.
but Bombay had this real sort of lure, and
Bombay might have that problem.
Yeah, exactly. Bombay had a real kind of allure and glow for me because it's the place that I was born and where I started growing up and where my family was. And then, I moved back there in my 20s and I was working as a reporter. And so I got to know a lot of the city in this very minute way, walking around and talking to people and stuff. And I did feel that there was a Bombay that I knew, that I experienced, that I had loved, that wasn't something I had read about in English fiction anyway, much. And a big part of that Bombay was from my childhood, was people who loved to read, people who were just big readers and dreamers, really. And a sort of middle-class Bombay. There are still those amazing old housing colonies in all sorts of places. They're just not necessarily the sort of image of Bombay that is disseminated as like high rises or dance bars or whatever.
It's not the image of Bombay that Bombay might want disseminated.
Yeah, I mean, God knows.
We've got some questions from the audience. Apparently there are humans out there. Anjum asks, what is the importance of a city? We were just talking about cities, reaffirmation from the world around us. What is the importance of a city or location vis-a-vis the characters in your book? Do they impact each other in any way, the city and the characters? And does the location impact the storyline or decisions made by the characters?
That's a great question, and it's very precise. So I'm probably not going to answer it in an equally precise way, but I think that the whole book is about this sort of sense of enchantment, and that's something that I associate with my time in Assam. For me, certainly, that it was a place that I was entranced by and also very confused by, you know, a bit like Ved Ved in the book. So, and also it's perhaps even more kind of compact and comedic in the book, but maybe not that much more. But, you know, because it's such a developed, interesting, historical, literary, fascinating society, someone like Ved is trying to uncode it in a way. Like he's trying to say, okay, but what's the sort of cultural code that really makes sense here? And he just continually comes up against paradox, really. So it's sort of like, you know, Alice in Wonderland or something. It's like, it's not really a place that is susceptible to that. It's not a place that's offering itself up to him in an easily digestible way. And that's probably part of what fascinates him. And I suppose there's an analog there also for the experience of falling in love or for a relationship. If it's really going to be something more enduring, then I guess it's not necessarily going to be something that's easily digestible and comprehensible and easy to grasp straight away. That it might be contradictory and frustrating actually for a while, but something just keeps you going.
And I got the sense that Ved also wanted to understand this new city as a way of understanding this very enigmatic woman.
Yeah, yeah. Though I don't know if she would necessarily see that as sort of completely equivalent, because she is also somebody who in some ways feels like an outsider in her own place, but also very deeply tied to it, which is maybe another sort of paradox of a kind of complicated, fascinating place that you know, you can feel incredibly, or at least many people I know of, many friends of mine feel incredibly Assamese and couldn't be anything else and love Assam, and yet also feel marginal. I mean, I suppose, you know, that's common to people in all places, that even if it's a place you've lived most of your life in, you might not always feel like you're in the mainstream of whatever is happening.
I used to think that only applied to cities, but I think these days it applies everywhere.
Yeah.
We have a question from Tarun, who asks, the term Lucifer, which is traditionally pejorative, is used as a positive symbol in the novel. Can you elaborate on how this inspiration occurred?
Well, Lucifer just means light bearer. And is it in Latin or Greek? Probably Latin, I think. And I did find out when I was kind of researching the name that it was also a term used, I mean, another name used for Jesus in the Bible, that it wasn't only used for Lucifer, the fallen angel in the Old Testament. Yeah. So, I think there is a sort of ambiguity. I mean, I'm not necessarily that interested in the kind of satanic aspects of it, but I think this is a period of time in which things that seem good can be not good, and things that seem challenging can be really sort of demonized, you know, and that maybe a sort of universal light or something kind of incredibly universal and abstract like truth or love with a big L, maybe these things are experienced by us humans at this period in time as with ambivalence, and sort of, you know, we think that our inner conflicts about these things are kind of interesting and important, and, you know, we think that we're going to get to decide about life and truth and the universe and stuff like that. I mean, obviously, the universe is probably laughing, you know, as the last couple of years have shown us, but still, yeah.
Yeah, it's good to remember that Lucifer is a name to do with light, and you know, it doesn't have the connotations, for example, that the word Satan does.
Right, but even Satan, Shaitan, is a sort of interesting word in the sense that it literally just means the adversary, and most of us have that adversary I mean, the main adversary we experience is very often the one inside us, right? Like, not that things can't go wrong in the outside world and that there aren't difficulties, but perhaps the biggest frustrations of all are the ones that the worst banana skins are the ones we sort of throw in front of ourselves and then fall over on.
Our own inner shaitans.
Yeah.
Gayatri says, the novel seems to have a very cinematic quality of storytelling. The scenes interplay like a screenplay. How do you incorporate this in your novels, if you do?
Well, thank you. It's not deliberate, but I think I really like scenes, and I also really like brevity. I have a kind of fear of boring a reader, and I just like, I suppose I do like that sort of rolling quality of, one thing and then another thing. One of the writers I really enjoy who does that sort of guiltlessly is the French writer Françoise Sagan, who can write like a chapter in 2.5 pages maybe. There's one of her books that I really like called La Chamade, which is about two people who are each in a couple, but they fall in love with each other and they sort of have a relationship and then they get together. And I think, so you spend the whole book with just these two people. There's one scene where they kind of go off for a weekend together and they have dinner together. And this is the kind of thing at this point in their relationship they don't really get to do because they're still with their other partners. But they have a conversation about their childhood or something, each of them. And it's like a paragraph each. And she's really like, that's the level of interest that she has in backstory, for example, like who are these people? So there's a sort of confidence in lightness that I really enjoy in her work. And it was probably something like that I had in mind when I did put the book together, I guess.
And it's true. She also has that very cinematic quality about
right.
Slim novels. I've just got a message, all in capitals, and it really did frighten me for a second, saying time is up. I mean
wow, yeah.
Really.
I guess one day that'll be true.
One day, very soon, the way things are going.
Thank you so much, Jeet.
Oh, thank you. That was so much fun.
Thank you, JLF. Thank you to the phantom but real people out there in the ether watching in the Akash.
And really interesting questions. Thanks for this.
Yeah, thank you so much for the questions.
And now
Thank you.
back to Sanjay.
Thanks so much, Jeet Thayil and Anjali. Anjali, I do hope the sequel to this book is going to be looking at your past life association with that. Seems to be already built in. Jeet, I hope there isn't a banker's knocking at your door, asking you to return whatever. And Anjali, I hope you're going to be safe from the intrusions of Twitter in your life and world. And thank you all for watching and sending in those wonderful questions. I hope all of you are going to heard this session will immediately go online on Amazon or wherever and pick up a book and read all about it. It was an absolutely fascinating conversation, and Anjali's connection to not just past life, but perhaps this other part of us was fascinating to hear. Please do stay logged on to watch our next session, China Room, Sanjeev Sohata, in conversation with Georgina Godwin. And this will be presented here at 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time later this evening. Thank you all. Stay double masked and stay safe. Anjali Joseph, Jeet Thayil, stay safe and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
these times during COVID, when we're all sitting at home, it's sort of like a ray of light that we get to watch these amazing sessions when we can't all be together. It certainly brightens up my evenings.
आज पेंडेमिक में हम डिजिटली लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल कर रहे हैं और मुझे लगता है कि हमारे सामने श्रोता नहीं है, हम आपस में बात कर रहे हैं, लेकिन उस फील को, उस उमंग को महसूस कर सकते हैं कि हजारों लाखों लोग हमसे जुड़े हुए हैं, हमको सुन रहे हैं और कहीं ना कहीं कोई एक सार्थक हस्तक्षेप हो रहा है.
People who came online to view and listen to our incredible speakers from across the world, we were able to continue in our tradition of ensuring the free flow of knowledge and information.